During the darkest years of the Second World War, when the skies over Europe thundered with the roar of metal, engines, and destruction, one aircraft stood out not because of its size or firepower, but because of what it was made of. While German and Allied factories forged aircraft from aluminum and steel, the British took an entirely different path. They built an aircraft out of wood, and not only did it fly, it dominated. That aircraft was the Havilland Mosquito, known around the world as the Wooden Wonder. The Mosquito's very existence would later drive Hermann Göring, the powerful and arrogant commander of the German Luftwaffe, to rage and envy. He famously declared that he turned green and yellow with envy whenever he saw the Mosquito streaking over Germany's skies, outpacing his best interceptors and humiliating his air defenses. To understand why Göring reacted with such fury, we need to go back to the origins of this remarkable aircraft. In the late 1930s, as Europe teetered toward war, the British aircraft industry was gearing up for mass production of fighters like the Spitfire and bombers like the Wellington and the Hampden. Aluminum was considered the lifeblood of air power, and every design revolved around it. But Geoffrey de Havilland, founder of the de Havilland Aircraft Company, thought differently. He believed that with the right design and materials, wood could be just as effective, perhaps even better for certain kinds of aircraft. His idea seemed absurd at the time. A high-performance military aircraft made mostly of plywood and balsa. Yet de Havilland had experience with wooden construction from his earlier racing aircraft and knew that wood could offer incredible strength-to-weight ratios when properly engineered. The concept he proposed to the British Air Ministry was radical: a fast, twin-engine aircraft with no defensive armament, relying solely on its speed to evade enemy fighters. It could serve as a photo reconnaissance aircraft, a light bomber, and eventually a night fighter. In theory, this approach would save metal for other production lines and allow Britain to use its furniture and woodworking industries to contribute to the war effort. Initially, the Air Ministry rejected the idea, considering it too risky. But de Havilland persisted, arguing that a wooden aircraft could be lighter, faster, and more adaptable than anything made entirely of metal. Eventually, the project received cautious approval, and the first prototype, the DH-98 Mosquito, took flight on November 25, 1940. The results stunned everyone. Powered by two Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same type that gave the Spitfire its legendary reputation, the Mosquito achieved speeds of over 400 miles per hour, faster than most contemporary fighters, let alone bombers. Its all-wood structure made it light and agile, while its smooth, polished surface reduced drag and radar visibility. Even more impressively, it could carry a bomb load nearly as large as the American B-17 Flying Fortress, but with a fraction of the crew and cost. In reconnaissance missions, it was practically untouchable, flying so high and so fast that German fighters could barely reach it. At first, the Germans didn't take the Mosquito seriously. Reports of a wooden bomber seemed laughable to the Luftwaffe's engineers, who prided themselves on cutting-edge metal designs like the Messerschmitt Bf-109, the Focke-Wulf FW-190, and the Junkers Ju-88. But as the Mosquito began to appear in more and more raids over occupied Europe, attitudes began to change. The aircraft proved nearly impossible to intercept. It slipped through radar networks, carried out precision bombings, and returned home before most German fighters could even scramble. By 1942, it had become one of the most feared and admired machines in the sky. The breaking point for Hermann Göring came on January 30, 1943, the 10th anniversary of Adolf Hitler's rise to power. On that symbolic day, Göring had organized a grand parade and a radio broadcast from Berlin to demonstrate that Nazi Germany was still strong, despite recent setbacks. But as Göring prepared for his speech, 3 Mosquito bombers from the Royal Air Force swooped in over the city in broad daylight. They dropped bombs precisely on the main broadcast building, forcing Göring's speech off the air. Hours later, as Joseph Goebbels tried to deliver his own speech, another wave of mosquitoes attacked again, sending Berlin's elite scurrying for cover. The humiliation was unbearable. The attacks caused little physical damage, but enormous psychological shock. Göring, the self-proclaimed master of the skies, had been outwitted by a handful of lightweight, unarmed wooden planes. In a fit of rage, he reportedly yelled to his staff, "I turn green and yellow with envy when I see the Mosquito. The British have the aluminum, yet they build a wooden plane that goes faster than our best fighters. What have we been doing all this time?" His words were both a confession of failure and a symbol of desperation. The Luftwaffe's proud reputation for technical superiority had been shattered by ingenuity and craftsmanship. Determined to respond, Göring ordered his engineers to develop a German equivalent, a fast, twin-engined wooden aircraft that could match or surpass the Mosquito. The task fell to several companies, most notably Focke-Wulf, under the direction of the brilliant designer Kurt Tank. The project was called the Ta-154 Mosquito, an unmistakable nod to the British original. On paper, it seemed promising: a sleek wooden airframe, twin UMO 211F engines, and the potential to serve as a night fighter or bomber. The Germans hoped that by using wood, they could bypass the shortages of aluminum that were crippling their aircraft industry by 1943. But almost from the start, the Ta-154 ran into trouble. The Germans faced a critical shortage of the special adhesives required for laminated wooden structures. The British had perfected a resin glue known as casein, and later used advanced synthetic adhesives that produced strong, waterproof bonds. The Germans, however, relied on a product called Tego film, manufactured in Wuppertal. When the Tego factory was destroyed in an Allied bombing raid, they were forced to substitute it with an inferior glue that contained acidic compounds. This caused catastrophic failures. Wooden panels separated, wings delaminated, and several prototypes broke apart during testing. Engineers scrambled to find replacements, but time was running out, and the Luftwaffe desperately needed working aircraft. Meanwhile, the production environment in Germany was collapsing. Allied bombing campaigns targeted factories, railways, and supply lines. Skilled labor was scarce, and materials were rationed. Many of the workshops capable of precision woodwork had already been converted for other wartime needs or destroyed outright. In Britain, by contrast, de Havilland had mobilized the furniture, piano, and coach-building industries to mass-produce Mosquitoes in sections. These parts were shipped to assembly centers and put together like a kit, a decentralized production system that made it almost impossible for the Luftwaffe to cripple the program through bombing. The Germans could not replicate this industrial model. Their entire aircraft industry was centralized, rigid, and under immense strain. Moreover, German engineers were skeptical of wooden construction. They preferred metals and considered wood outdated. Even though Göring demanded a wooden aircraft, many designers privately doubted the concept. The result was a rushed, underfunded program plagued by design flaws and material failures. The Ta-154 flew, but it never achieved the Mosquito's level of performance. It was slower, less maneuverable, and far more fragile. Production barely reached a few dozen units before the war ended, and by then, jet aircraft like the Me-262 had already taken priority. The contrast between the two aircraft couldn't be sharper. The British Mosquito entered combat in 1941 and remained in frontline service until the end of the war, performing thousands of missions across Europe and Asia. It was used as a bomber, reconnaissance aircraft, night fighter, pathfinder, and even for daring precision strikes like the raid on Amiens prison in 1944, which freed French resistance members scheduled for execution. It was beloved by its crews and respected by its enemies. German fighter pilots often referred to it grudgingly as der Holzgeist, the wooden ghost, because it seemed to appear out of nowhere and vanish just as quickly. The Ta-154, by comparison, existed largely as a prototype and a propaganda tool. Göring would occasionally mention it in speeches as proof that Germany could match Allied innovation,
But everyone in the Luftwaffe knew the truth. The program was a failure. The wooden airframes suffered from warping, cracking, and delamination, and maintenance crews hated working on them. Test pilots found the aircraft unstable at high speeds and dangerous to land. When the first few models entered service in mid-1944, they were already obsolete. Allied bombers were flying higher and faster, and the Luftwaffe's resources were stretched to the breaking point. Why did Germany fail where Britain succeeded? The answer lies not just in materials or engineering, but in mindset. The British embraced flexibility and improvisation. They recognized that wood, an ancient material, could serve modern warfare if used intelligently. They combined skilled craftsmanship with scientific precision, developing composite structures that were both strong and light. Germany, on the other hand, was trapped in its own technological arrogance. Its leaders believed superiority came from complexity, from the heaviest armor, the biggest guns, or the most advanced metals. They underestimated the power of simplicity and efficiency.
Moreover, the Mosquito's success was rooted in its versatility. It wasn't designed for just one mission. It could photograph enemy territory by day, bomb a city by night, or intercept enemy aircraft in darkness. Its wooden structure dampened vibration and radar reflection, making it not only fast but also stealthy by the standards of the 1940s. The Germans never developed a single aircraft that could do all those things. Their designs were specialized and rigid, tailored for narrow roles. When the tide of war shifted, they couldn't adapt fast enough. The irony is that by the end of the war, Germany itself was forced to use wood more and more, not out of innovation, but out of desperation. As Allied bombing destroyed their aluminum plants, aircraft like the Heinkel 162 Volksjäger and even late-model U-88s incorporated wooden components. But by then, it was too late. The strategic situation had collapsed, and no amount of makeshift engineering could reverse the outcome. Göring's furious order to build a Mosquito of our own had turned into another symbol of the Reich's decline, an empire of metal undone by a plane of wood. For the British, the Mosquito represented the best of wartime ingenuity. It was fast, efficient, and elegant, embodying the idea that innovation often comes from unconventional thinking. Its wooden structure allowed it to be built in small workshops scattered across the country, beyond the reach of German bombers. Housewives varnished its panels, furniture makers shaped its wings, and skilled carpenters glued its fuselage halves together. Every Mosquito carried with it the fingerprints of 1,000 ordinary workers who turned civilian skills into military power. Even today, aviation historians view the Mosquito as one of the greatest aircraft ever built. It wasn't just a triumph of engineering, but a triumph of imagination. Proof that brilliance can emerge from limitations. It forced the enemy to question its assumptions, and in Göring's case, to confront his own envy and impotence. The Reichsmarshal who once boasted that no enemy bomber would ever penetrate German airspace found himself watching helplessly as wooden British bombers flew over Berlin in broad daylight. His words, "I turned green and yellow with envy," have echoed through history as both a confession and a cautionary tale. When the war finally ended in 1945, many surviving Mosquitoes were retired or sold, but their legacy endured. The lessons learned from their design influenced post-war aircraft construction, including early composite materials and aerodynamic techniques. The Mosquito's concept of using speed and agility instead of brute strength paved the way for future multi-role aircraft. In contrast, the German attempt to copy it, the TA-154, faded into obscurity, a footnote in the story of the Luftwaffe's decline. In the end, the saga of Göring's envy and the Mosquito's triumphs is not just about airplanes. It's about creativity under pressure, about how innovation often thrives when resources are scarce and ideas are free. The Mosquito proved that genius doesn't always come from the largest factories or the most expensive metals, but from daring to think differently.
And that's why, even today, the wooden wonder remains a symbol of human ingenuity and a reminder that sometimes the simplest materials can build the most extraordinary legends.